Good morning everyone, my name is Fahmi from SMA Negeri 1 Banjarnegara, and today I'm participating in ISTC 2026 as the proposition. While today's debate motion is, this House will prioritize preserving cultural traditions even at the cost of slowing social progress. And standing as the proposition, I would like to clearly define today's motion. So, preserving cultural traditions means protecting the Rumah Adat system of the Kairan community, including collective land ownership, elder-led decision-making, and mandatory one-year cultural apprenticeship for young people. While social progress refers to reforms such as individual land ownership, complete youth autonomy, gender-neutral inheritance systems, and rapid integration into mainstream urban education and employment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we, standing as the proposition, does not reject progress. We are not saying that education, equality, or economic development are bad. What we are saying is simple. When a rapid modernization threats the survival of an indigenous culture, the preservation of that culture must come first. Because once a culture disappears, it is almost impossible to bring it back. Ladies and gentlemen, our case today is based on three main arguments. The first one, preserving cultural traditions protect identity and prevents cultural extinction. For indigenous communities like the Kairan people, culture is not merely a traditional clothing or ceremonies. It is their identity, their history, their values, and their way of understanding the world. The opposition may argue that young people should immediately integrate into urban society for a faster progress. But what happens when this integration becomes too fast? It will create young people stop speaking their native language, and then traditional knowledge disappears. Oral histories are forgotten. Farming rituals, local wisdom, and community values slowly vanish within one generation. The mandatory cultural apprenticeship exists precisely to prevent this. For 1 year, young people learn their language, traditions, history, and cultural practices before entering the modern world. And let us be clear, this system does not permanently trap them in the village. After completing their apprenticeship, they are still free to pursue their higher education and employment. What our side protect is balance, because education without identity creates people who are economically productive but culturally disconnected. And once indigenous cultures disappear, society loses something irreplaceable. Because economic system can be rebuilt, but extinct cultures cannot. For example, many indigenous people in Australia or Canada have disappeared because their younger generation were pushed to fully assimilate into mainstream society. And then the second argument, that collective land ownership protects indigenous people from external exploitation. The opposition wants an individual land ownership because they believe it can create freedom and economic opportunity. But in reality, what often happens is very different from their model. When land becomes individually owned, poorer members of the community become very vulnerable to pressure from corporations, developers, or outside inventors. And slowly, ancestral land gets sold piece by piece. And eventually, indigenous people lose control over the very land that sustains their community. For the Kairan people, land is not simply an economic asset. It carries spiritual meaning, social responsibility, food security, and cultural identity. Collective ownership can prevent land speculation and protects the community from exploitation by powerful outside actors. And without those protections, rapid modernization may enrich a few individuals temporarily, but destroy the long-term survival of the community itself. And history has shown us many examples around the world where indigenous communities lost their land in the name of development only to end up in marginalized and powerless afterward. We have already seen similar cases in Papua today. In the viral documentary Pesta Babi, Kolonialisme di Zaman Kita, the indigenous Papuan communities describe how large-scale food estate and bioethanol projects entered their ancestral land and forest in the name of development and food security. Some communities claim that forest and customary lands were taken over for industrial plantations and military facilities, threatening their traditional way of life that respects nature a lot and slowly endanger their cultural systems. And this is exactly why collective indigenous land protection matters. Once customary land is open too easily to outside economic interests, the indigenous community can lose not only property but also identity, history, and cultural over their future. That is why our side refuses to let that happen. And then the third argument, as the last one, preserving traditional structure creates a more stable and humane transition into modern society. The opposition frames youth autonomy as absolute freedom, but we must ask, freedom into what? Because rapid integration into urban society does not automatically guarantee dignity or success. Because in fact, many indigenous youth who leave their communities too early often face discrimination, exploitation, cultural isolation, and economic insecurity in cities. They lose their traditional support system before they are fully prepared to survive independently. The apprenticeship system prevents this kind of problem and prepare not only oppressing the young generation, and it gives young people a cultural grounding, emotional belonging, practical skills, and a strong sense of responsibility before they enter wider societies. Or in other words, our side supports a gradual and sustainable progress instead of reckless and destabilizing change. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition will likely accuse us of being anti-progress or anti-freedom, but that is a clear misunderstanding of our position. We are not rejecting modernization, we are rejecting forced assimilation, because there is a difference between helping indigenous communities develop and pressuring them to absorb the system that have preserved them for centuries. Ladies and gentlemen, not every traditional system is oppressive, and not every modern reform automatically creates justice. True progress should empower communities, not erase them. And today's debate is ultimately about protecting identity, heritage, and that right of indigenous community to preserve their way of life in a rapidly globalizing world, because a society that destroys its own culture in the name of progress is not truly progressing at all. And for all of those reasons, we firmly stand in support of today's motion. Thank you.